we are live. One day at a time, right?
Yeah.
Welcome to the Onward Podcast. Hi, everybody. It's Emily. Oh, it's so exciting. I already see a couple people here. And Russ and I know we've said your name before. I'm not Spanish, so I don't know how to really say it with the accent and everything, but I think it's not Ligia. I know that is not the hard G. But anyway, thank you guys for showing up. I really appreciate you. And this is my last live of 2021. I can't believe that so much time has gone by. It's already December, almost Christmas, and I'm flying to Denver tomorrow to visit my daughter. So I want to thank my guest, Geralyn, for agreeing to move her episode to tonight instead of my usual Wednesday night time. And I'm really excited to meet with Geralyn. Geralyn Gendreau is my guest, and we're talking about uncover your core wound and discover your true self. And, you know, the Onward Podcast is all about facing adversity, moving forward, and discovering ourselves along the way. And I've been learning so much about myself in the past couple of years. I love learning more about how we can discover our true self and what that means, and getting different people's interpretations or advice on what that means. So I'm really excited today. So Geralyn is a licensed psychotherapist, and she's been one since 1995. And it says she's a playful, soul-provoking life coach. And she believes that one of the keys to happiness is being able to laugh at yourself. And she's also the author of a book called Jungle Gene, which just came out. And it's the biography of her mentor, Liedloff, who traveled into the pristine regions of the Venezuelan rainforest back in the 1950s, and then wrote a book called The Continuum Concept, which became a child-rearing classic. So I'm so excited to meet Geralyn. Let's bring her in. And how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. I can feel your enthusiasm. It's like tangible. I love that.
I'm excited. And being an introvert after these shows, I go and crash, right?
I understand. I always say I'm a situational extrovert.
Yeah, definitely. That's me too. We've got a lot of people here watching. We've got Mariah. Mariah is going to be on the show coming up in January, and then Kenneth Thunner. He's always here. He says savor the flavor of the awesomeness of you. You know, that's what he's always calling out other guests and saying how much he appreciates them. So there's a lot of people watching tonight. Dee Baker. Oh, she says she laughs at herself all the time, which is good. Yep. So we've got a lot of people here tonight, and I really appreciate them being here. It's always nice when you go live to have, guests chatting. And so from time to time, they'll ask questions, and that's one of the things here. I say, tell us where you're tuning in from. Okay. Post that in the comments. It's always fun to see where. I know Ligia is from Costa Rica, so it's always fun to see where people are tuning in from around the world. So Geralyn, welcome. So excited to have you here.
Yeah, it's lovely to be here.
So tell us a little bit more about yourself, and why you wanted to be on this podcast. Why do you feel like your story fits into like the theme of the Onward Podcast about facing adversity and moving forward and discovering ourselves?
Well, I know that from the very beginning of my personal growth journey, like in my 20s, I won't date myself, but I'm quite a bit older than that now. It was always the pain that pushed me forward. I don't know that I'd ever gone and tried to find myself if I hadn't been in a lot of pain, because there's lots of other things to do with, your time, like focus on making money or whatever it is. So for me, it was always about sorting myself out. I was just telling somebody the other day that I went to graduate school. I got an advanced degree in psychology because I wanted to figure me out. It actually didn't work. At the end of graduate school, I just knew an awful lot about how things go wrong. And I could name all the psychoses and neuroses that we see all the time. Of course, this was back in the 90s and before the positive psychology movement really got started. So actually, my experience in graduate school is what eventually led me to Liedloff, whose biography I've written and very thrilled to now have published. It became an international bestseller like within a couple of days. So that was really a delight.
Yeah, and you have like 5 New York Times best-selling authors writing tributes to your book. I think Gloria Steinem is one of them.
Yeah, Gloria was the first endorsement I got. She knew Jean. They were friends. I cut my teeth in publishing doing anthologies. So those were collections of essays. So I learned how to track people down because we had like Neil Donald Walsh and Deepak Chopra and all those very famous authors in the personal development fields in the books, and what it takes. Like I'm like a dog with a bone when I want to get a hold of somebody.
Wow.
It took quite a while, many phone calls, right? Probably a year to get through to Gloria Steinem. And same with Rianne Eisler. Marcy Scheimoff was fairly easy because she shows up at parties in my neighborhood. But yeah, I was determined. And most of these people had heard of Jean. It's really the influence of Jean's work, not my, my fame or I am a very skilled writer, gifted, I think, actually. I feel very blessed to have both been gifted with this ability to write and to have had a 20-year career as a writer. So,
yeah.
So that's, but the bottom line for me, really, Jean, I was always looking for, why was I in so much pain internally? I had this inner turmoil. I went through cyclical. I'm not dysthymic, which is really a clinical condition of depression, periodic depression. But I had a lot of mood swings. That's what we call them, is mood swings, coinciding with menstruation and all that. And I could never figure it out. And I had an eating disorder. So I had a lot of self-image issues and, self-doubt and, I'm not right and all that kind of stuff going on for most of my life. And it was really through my experience with Jean. So let me I'll back up just a little bit.
Yeah.
Because her theory, so the continuum concept is the idea that 7 million years of hominid evolution prepared a human organism, and specifically a human infant, to expect a certain kind of treatment when it's an infant. So we are born utterly helpless, like think about a horse or a cow gives birth to a baby, and the calf or the colt gets up and they're trotting around the pasture within a couple hours. A human infant needs 9 months to a year of constant holding. And we deny this need at our peril. And it really has a profound impact on the child. So she lived in the rainforest. She used to call them Stone Age Indians. I should say, I went back to the Stone Age. I mean, these days we can't call them Indians. They're indigenous peoples. But that's, she was in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And she saw how these people lived in a natural way that had never diverged from the continuum. So they were still living in alignment with the natural harmonies of their rhythms, of the developmental process a child goes through when it's not thrown into modern society, where they are left to cry themselves asleep at bed and mom and dad are on their phones all the time. And, it just was a much more natural, where the baby is carried for 6 to 9 months. They have in Bali a ritual when the child's feet touch the ground for the first time, because they're always held, handed off, So one of the ways, the easiest ways to explain this and really illustrate it. So, like I said, most mammals give birth, the baby comes out, and it can walk within, very short period of time. Now that's because they're 4-legged. So the hips are broader. So the baby gestates long enough that it's mature enough to be fairly independent when it comes out. Humans, when we went upright, the pelvis shrunk. So we started giving birth. The Homo sapiens that survived were the ones that gave birth to premature babies, essentially. These helpless little things, that need to be fed and held and can't be left alone, And and then think about a kangaroo. Kangaroos are marsupials. They're halfway upright. They're still squatting, so they still have it. But they, like their little ones, crawl down in the pouch, and that's where they finish their gestation. They're very safe. Well, humans don't have a pouch, and we're not 4-legged anymore. But we have hands, and we have opposable thumbs, and we were in a stage of development where we were inventing tools. So the tools that the moms invented is called a sling. Like tie the baby on your hip and go about your business. Baby wearing was all they knew. They wore their babies on their hips. and they just went on with life. It wasn't like a separate part of life. So the infant received this information from its first breath, really, about, oh, this is my right place. I belong here. The world is safe. I'm going to be taken care of. So with that laid down as the foundation, is very different than most of us got. Now, I'll tell you my story, because this is what laid down a foundation of me, of insecurity, uncertainty about where do I belong, who I am, what am I here for, all of that. I was born, when I was born, they thought sodium pentothal was a good idea for a labor drug.
Oh.
Sodium pentothal, also known as truth serum, is a fast-acting anesthetic. So basically, my mom was knocked out cold. Fast-acting anesthetic. They give it to people in the gas chamber and euthanasia. Okay, so this is what they thought was a good thing back then. So mom's knocked out. I come out of the womb. I vomit. I always say I was a born bulimic. I come out and I throw this stuff up because, some chemical. And then I can't keep any food down. So mom and dad go home without me. Now, the story goes that she did hold me and she got to meet me and have her baby in her arms, but then she went home. So those first 24 hours of my life, I was not held. I was not on my mother's body, nowhere near it. I was probably in a crib alone in, next to the incubator kids, or in what they used to call the nursery. So all that earliest experience that informs really the organism at the most fundamental level, now that we know that the nervous system is getting laid down by these experiences. And in the absence of that kind of experience, that's where all kinds of adaptations grow that then become neuroses as we get older, and they become thought patterns because the emotions happen first. Emotions are feelings really are primary. I think of feelings as prior to emotions. Feelings become emotions when we give them a name.
Yeah.
And then it's a thing I have rather than something that's moving through me. So feelings come and go if we don't attach ourselves to them. But I'm going all over the map. So
no. Yeah. So you were initially, you didn't have time with your mom because of the way.
Yeah. And so that generates all the things. Nowadays, it's very popular to talk about attachment issues and attachment disorders. So I am avoidant and anxious attachment, depending on what the other person's doing. So those are the kinds of things that occur when an infant isn't reassured or assured or experientially demonstrated that it's wanted, that it's worthy, that it's welcome in this world. If it doesn't get those needs, it doesn't really know what to make of itself and the universe. And so discovering who one is, so the value of Jean's work for me is it gave me an intellectual framework for all of that so that I could understand it.
Jean went and spent time with these indigenous peoples and learned how they bring the kids up, and that their kids don't have a lot of the same behavioral issues that ours do. Like they don't have the terrible twos.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they don't go through adolescent rebellion. They don't argue with each other. They're very cooperative. And part of that is about what's expected of them. The illustration she used to give that I just loved, she'd say, a child can read its parents' expectation. So if the parent expects the child to be naughty, guess what? The kid gets the message, you're going to be naughty. So Jean would always say, so you're sending little Tommy off to visit grandma, and you say, Tommy, be good. And what does that mean? Better fake it because we know you're bad, So there's these subliminal messages that come through in just the attitude of the parent toward the child. And we have this very sensitive, radar that picks all that up. And
could I just start over? I'm 58, but is it too late for me to start over rearing my children?
Well,
this is maybe mistakes.
There are people who hate Jean for reading her book, for writing her book, because they felt so like, oh my God, I've ruined my kids. I think it was the maybe second or third edition. She did write an introduction that addressed that. Like, guess what? You're not the only one, and it's not your fault. Your culture. And I believe, at this point, I think that although her framework and her theory really talks about that this is what leads to optimal development, we still develop. And in many ways, the theme of your podcast, it's like, okay, so you didn't get so there have been many innovations, many things have grown out of the fact that we didn't get it. I think it was not too long ago, Gabor Mate did The Wisdom of Trauma. And he frames it that way. He says there's wisdom in your trauma.
Yeah.
So at this point, we have to think of we can't go back and start over. Can't go back and start over with your kids. Can't come back and redo your own. But there are many, many ways. Like I comfort my little girl all the time. When I'm feeling just before I came on, like, it's been totally horrible here today, weather, like dark, and I'm an outdoor sun girl. So there was a little break in the rain and I went out for a walk, but I was feeling kind of funky.
So when you say you comforted your little girl, I know what you mean, but somebody else might not. It's not your daughter. It's you. It's a little
it's me.
Yeah. You.
Yeah. So, there's the inner child work has been popular for forever. I think of it, the way I conceive of it is that and this relates to a near-death experience I had where I was actually kind of catapulted out of time and space to a place where everything's happening all at once. So the infant sphere and any time, place where some trauma or some challenge occurred, it's still there.
Yeah.
In the field of all of infinity, it still exists. So I think of it of the infant sphere of self. So one of the things I do every night when I go to bed, I curl up in a certain way that's super cozy. I put a pillow between my legs and I put another one behind me. I make sure that I feel hugged. And to me, it's a cheap imitation, but it's like a way that I like just welcome myself into that sense of being held, of being wanted. And it's just, it's a little thing, but I think I've been doing it every night for a year and a half, 2 years. And that's actually been demonstrated now scientifically to have some impact on the nervous system. So the trauma work, when I was in graduate school, nobody had been talking much about incest until then. So in the early 90s, this book came out called The Courage to Heal. And all of a sudden, what hadn't been talked about before was being talked about. Right now, that's trauma.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, trauma's coming out of the closet and people starting to acknowledge it. So there is something very different that can happen in the presence of, kind of a cultural wave of healing that comes when people start to acknowledge things that previously they were unaware of.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I really love about this book being out there and my getting to talk about it is that most of us in the Western world are carrying some form of, I don't like the word damage, but some form of injury from not having been held like that. Now, the younger generation, a lot of them did get carried around. The snuggly became very popular.
Yeah, that's popular now.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to ask. So how did you meet Jean?
So I tracked her down. When I was finishing graduate school, I was working at Women's Alcoholism Center in the city, which is a drug and alcohol treatment facility. It's no longer there, but it was a residential treatment program for addicted mothers and their children because their children had been taken out of the home by Child Protective Services. So this was a reunification plan where they could regain custody of their kids if they stayed clean and sober for a year. So there was a parenting manual. And this parenting manual kind of made no sense to me. I was like, what do you mean she can't lay down and take a nap with her kid? Her kid's a crack baby. He's got fetal alcohol syndrome. He needs to be held. It was obvious to me. Well, I didn't know then that he needed to be held. I just knew that it was not right that we would tell her, no, you can't lay down with him. I was like, that's going to comfort him. And
that's the best thing is to take a nap with your kid.
I know, it's like the most natural thing in the world. So I didn't know what was right. I just knew that was wrong. So eventually I had to quit the job. And I listened to Riane Eisler's, I didn't listen to it. Now I listen to books all the time, but I read Riane Eisler. So she's one of the other people that endorsed the book. She wrote a very beautiful classic book called The Chalice and the Blade. That's all about the ancient societies that were really matriarchal in nature. So they were partnership rather than domination societies. And I read that book and I was just fascinated. And I thought, I told a friend jokingly, I need to find a time machine and go back to those days and see what their parenting manual said. And she says, you don't need to do that. Just read this. And she handed me Jean Liedloff's book. So I read it in an afternoon, buckled my knees. I was just like, oh my God, nothing I'd studied in graduate school came anywhere close to explaining to me why I felt the way I felt and soothing me, because it made me realize I'm not sick. I'm not, it's not that I'm a messed up, neurotic, self-obsessed, nut job. It's that I didn't get the most basic needs that would make for a whole person, a whole confident, happy human being in my infancy. And so that was the beginning of a long process of forgiveness, working through, I wanted to blame my mom for a long time. And then I realized, she was as damaged by it as I was. She didn't get to have that experience.
Right.
So,
wow. So you tracked her down and then you studied under her with her for 15 years. But you wrote, but there's something in here that says, that I read about you that says, paradoxically, the friendship between Geralyn and her mentor became a quagmire of unmet needs and unrealistic expectations.
yeah,
But it was these very relationship difficulties that gave rise to your fascination with the blind spot phenomenon. So what happened with your relationship with her?
Jean was a difficult person. So initially I was her assistant, and then I started a nonprofit for her. And then we just became friends after that. And for a while I studied with her in her method of therapy. But she told me the first time we had lunch together, she said, Pussycat, she always called me either Pussycat or Darling. She said, there's something I always do that pushes people away, and I don't know what it is. She said, I ruined my relationship with Gloria Steinem. She doesn't return my calls anymore. I do this over and over again. I push people away. I don't know how I do it. That became a theme throughout our relationship. So she pleaded with me to tell her what it was. But when I would tell her, she would do it even stronger. Like she would just insult me just offhandedly, and sometimes, she would be so mean. I'll tell you one example. When one of my anthologies came out, I gave my first book talk in San Francisco at one of those whole life expos or something. And I went, I dressed rather conservatively. Mostly everything I own shows cleavage, So I thought I was dressing very conservatively, putting on this black turtleneck and a black skirt. And I wore fishnets, fishnets are no big deal. So here I think I'm looking, pretty sharp and conservative in my New York attire instead of my, flowy Northern California skirts and flowers in my hair. And afterwards, I went straight to her house. She lived in Sausalito, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge, in a houseboat. And I knock on the door, and she opens the door, and she looks at me, and she goes, "You look like a tart." No. And that's the kind of stuff she would just say all the time. And if I would say something about it, like I would say, Jean, that's the kind of thing you do that pushes people away. Remember, you asked me to, and she'd say, "You're being an idiot," or "Don't be so sensitive," or, she would just further insult me,
Well, so she kind of must have liked you because she asked you to write the book.
Well, okay. So that's a story too. I'm a professional writer, and I'm really the only person who was going to write the book. And Jean actually, she wanted to die. She attempted suicide twice. Not because she was depressed, but because she couldn't get out of bed anymore. And she said, life's not worth living bedpan to bedpan, which I can kind of understand. So she made 2 suicide attempts. And the first time, the way we got her out of the hospital was I told her that she needed to stop telling the doctors she was going to kill herself, because then they were in the psych ward and she was never going to get to go home. So we'd better tell them that she was excited to go home and write her memoir, and that I was going to help her write her memoir. So I actually believed that it could happen at that point. I was like, okay, I'm going to bring you superfood smoothies every day, and we'll get your knees together, and I'll get you out of bed again. And she wasn't having it. She was like, superfood smoothies? This is somebody who lived on microwave Trader Joe's food for the last 10 years of her life. So it was kind of in the field. She knew that I'm a writer. She'd read some of my writing. I was really the only person who was going to do it. So there was a day, in fact, this story's in the book. There's a day that she looked at me and she said, "You be my Boswell." So this was another incident where she insulted me. but it was the one time that it turned around. And I think that's one of the things people really love about this book, is that it tells that story. Mm-hmm. So the whole blind spot phenomenon, the whole story is told in the book, and people read it and they're like, oh my God. Even my brother, he was like, oh no, I wonder what my blind spot is.
So I want to get to that. I want to talk about blind spots. So first, let's look at a couple of comments. So Kenneth says, such a beautifully well-articulated, eloquently stated, heartfelt story filled with delectable nuggets of wisdom, kindness, goodness, patience, encouragement, empathy. Wow, Kenneth. he says, positivity, compassion, inspiration, resilience, and respect. You've got a new fan.
Thank you. That's beautiful. I've never been on a live podcast before. It's kind of fun.
Kind of fun, isn't it? He says it's never too late to learn anything in life. Learning is what living is all about. Yeah. Lydia says, your story resonates with me, Geralyn. You are truly admirable. That's awesome. I know the lives are fun. Genevito says, I've had students as young as 63, retired from 3 different careers, but was just now going through and getting that his bachelor's. But say, wait, somebody up here. Oh yeah. He says, I love listening to your podcast after a tough day because it makes me grateful of my humble beginnings and reminds me of the sacrifice my parents made so that I can live the life I live. Greetings today from rainy San Diego. It's not usually rainy. That's why he said.
Yeah, California is getting soaked. That's a good thing, though.
Yeah, and we've got Mariah here. She's saying hi. Let's see. I'm trying to catch them all. Oh, we've got that about the story. And let's see. I think we've got them. I think we've got a lot of good comments. If anyone, I think I've got them. Kenneth says, tonight's conversation is so scrumptiously, deliciously, edibly, tasty good. If you guys have any comments or, questions, please post them. So let's talk about that blind spot theory.
Yeah, and this is when you and I were talking about what to title the show. It is really. So I'll tell you the story of my core wound, and this story is in the book too. It took me a while, a bit of campaigning to get Jean to trust that I'd been through something and seen my own blind spot. So I'll back up a little. So once she told me this, I have something I do that I started to notice that other people I knew had something like that. Similarly, I would watch my girlfriends and go, oh God, she doesn't know that she keeps doing that same thing over and over and over. Like, yeah, you're shooting yourself in the foot, but you can't tell somebody that bluntly. So I decided to start this women's group. There was a circle of women and we'd sit around, and I thought I had this idea that we could just sit on the hot seat and talk about what was going on, and that, girlfriends would say, well, this is what I see you doing, that, I think you're like, but it didn't work out that way. It was like, I didn't have skillful means. So it became, one of those goddess circles where it's like, oh baby, but you're so gorgeous. And he just didn't understand you. And I was like, yeah, this isn't what I had in mind. So eventually, I stopped. That didn't work out. And then years later, I was in a relationship that had its challenges. And a friend of mine told me that she'd met this guy that did this amazing work, and that I should come, Bob and I should come. And that, she before we broke up, we should try this. And I had the experience of someone leading. So long story short, it was the most powerful personal growth work I ever did. And I returned to the moment where my blind spot formed. So typically it's something that is a shock or a trauma, that I think of it as the inception point of the negative ego. It's like the place where you lose touch with who you are because something happens that you can't make sense of. So you do something to handle that trauma or to deal with the pain that works.
How old were you when that happened?
When mine was actually not traumatic. I'll explain to you what mine was. But first, I'll tell you what another person that I watched go through this process. And in some of the personal growth work, they talk about something similar. They call it your racket, is one of the things I've heard it called, or your strategy. One woman I used to work with called it your PAT, your personal addictive theme, negative core, negative beliefs, all that kind of stuff. But I've never been through a process like this, that you just stay in it and you're surrounded by a group of people who everybody is going to do this process, and it could take hours, but everybody's very committed. So there's something about having the reflections coming from different angles and from having someone lead it who's very skilled that is quite profound. So another person that I watched go through it, in fact, this story's in the book, he was 4 or 5 and he was outside. He'd never been in trouble in his life, really good kid. One of his earliest memories, very traumatic, was he was outside playing with, those big nuts. You can see one of those big metal nuts, like he started playing with it, like throwing it up in the air, and it was like a ball. He was like, wow, this is cool. And he threw it against the house, and he was like, oh, better not do that. Scratch the paint or whatever. So he's just playing. He's out in the backyard. He's like, where are all my friends? And there's this vacant lot, and he's throwing it up in the air, and he throws it up, and it hits even harder, and it makes this groovy sound. Kids, they're just being kids.
Yeah.
And so one time he throws it really high, and it bounces off the fence and hits this little girl in the head. And she's screaming and crying and bleeding, and he's dragged upstairs, and all these adults standing around him going, like pointing their fingers at him. Nobody's listening to him. He's wanting to say, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean to hurt her. I'm sorry, but nobody will even listen to him. So and he came into the workshop wanting to work on his relationships, because every woman that he'd ever been with always would tell him the same thing. Like, there's a certain point where I feel like I mean nothing to you. Like, hello, are you even in there? You're like, you've closed the door on me, and I feel like I mean nothing to you. Well, when he went back to that experience and actually re-experienced being in that moment of that core wound, that early wounding of being denied his voice, not being allowed to tell his truth or even defend himself, just being accused, he put up the wall of, you mean nothing to me. Like, he made those people mean nothing. And then because that worked, whenever he felt stressed like that or under attack, he had a big thing about feeling falsely accused. If he felt falsely accused, it was like, doors closed, complete disappearance. So my experience was a little different. It wasn't a trauma event. But it was a highly unusual event that highlighted kind of a consistent trauma that I lived within all the time. So my mom, I always say my mom wasn't a helicopter mom. She was a fleet of helicopters. Like she watched us every move we made growing up. She had 3 of us, me and 3 brothers. And so we were always under heavy surveillance. So my earliest memory is of, for years I puzzled over it. Like, why is this meant? Like, did something happen? Because I just had this memory of this sidewalk up the side of the house and this ivy. Like, why would you remember that unless something horrible, awful, like did some guy flash me or something? Like, I always wondered, because early memories, we remember the things that are unusual. So it's like that thing that's never happened before. Because it's never happened before, that's what tags it for long-term memory.
Okay.
So it's like a fish that gets thrown up out of water and goes, oh, whoa, there's another world. And then you splash back down in the water. And, but we don't forget those things. They get tagged for long-term memory. And so I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling, but
you saw the ivy.
Yeah. So the moment, so that incident that day, it turns out, it was when I escaped my mother's surveillance. So there was a party. When I went through this hot seat experience, I returned to the moment when I'm 3 years old and there's this party going on inside. Cause I also remembered this big window, and I was like, oh, what's with the window and the ivy and the sidewalk? That's all I could remember. So as you go in and you're held in this container of these people and having your own, like the signals, the subtle signals and the eye movements, you track your way back and actually relive that moment. And in that moment, when it was my brother's birthday, my mother didn't know where I was. I escaped. I was outside. I was outside of the surveillance, and the ivy was like alive. And that was like, I must have just been in awe that I was free from under that, eagle eye of my mother always watching everything I did. And so when I was in this workshop, the words that came out of my mouth were, I can disappear. So it was just this moment of understanding. And I've done a disappearing act my whole entire life. Like I could see the connection between that early wound of being, not trusted at all, and then suddenly free to trust myself to explore the natural world. That anytime I feel hemmed in, I just bolt. I just got to get out of there. Like I get so agitated that I want to escape. I want to disappear. And there was something, this is why I wanted it to be the theme of the show, because discover your true self. When I discovered that, for 2 or 3 weeks, I had so much energy. I couldn't believe it. It was like I was restored in some way to my original face. I always say I saw my original face. And once you see that, it's not like the patterns go away. I mean, we know from neuroscience that these things are deeply grooved into the brain. But I never do it now without noticing it.
Without noticing it.
And in that noticing, I have a different choice. There was actually just a couple of weeks ago, I was visiting a friend of mine. And, we got kind of cozy on the couch and he was rubbing my shoulders and I started getting a little like nervous. And all of a sudden it was really funny because I started to get that hemmed in feeling. Oh no, what does he want? And what's going to happen here? And just an anxiety, and uncertainty. And so all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I got to go. And nobody has ever done what he did that day. It was so funny. He looked at me and he goes, what just happened?
Wow. And you knew what happened.
Most men would just be like, whoa, where'd she go?
That's amazing.
He's very conscious and he just like kind of called me on it. And I went, oh, there I go. That's the thing I do. And laughed and sat down and we had a lovely evening. So
let me ask, had you ever, before you did that exercise with those people, had you ever seen the ivy in the window before?
Oh, I always knew that was my earliest memory, but I had no idea
what it meant.
Why. And when I was in graduate school and this whole thing with incest was so big, I thought, well, maybe somebody molested me, I mean, I always wanted to be an incest survivor because that would explain why I felt so horrible inside. But that's not my story. And it's a different kind of feel horrible. I mean, I do, and I've worked with enough incest survivors to know that that's a whole nother syndrome. But what I had was bad enough to, make my life pretty crazy for years. I mean, I never had children. I still, to this day, can't maintain a relationship for more than 6 or 8 weeks. I had one 6-year relationship that was lovely in its way. And I learned that I'm actually pretty good at it. But it really impacted my life. And more we're seeing, and there's a lot of science behind this. In fact, I'm going to do the second edition of Jungle Gene and include an appendix that cites all the science that, because there have been all kinds of studies that really demonstrate that our earliest experiences, it impacts the immune system. It impacts your health throughout your life. All these things that, Gabor Mate's work is really fascinating.
That's amazing. Wow. Yeah. So somebody, I can't tell who it is. It says Facebook user. It says, this is my first podcast and I'm listening with my heart. Thank you. Sweet. And then Alex said, interesting topic and conversation, very relevant. And then he also says, awareness is so important to any change. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's amazing when you have, like, I've become aware of more things about myself that, I didn't know. And it's just like, it's just kind of freeing. It's amazing. And you can catch yourself and you can realize that you're going down that same rabbit hole again. If you don't want to, you can make a different decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like what you said. I'm really interested to know about your near-death experience because it seems it took you to a place that not many of us have been, or that we don't know we've been.
Yeah, NDEs are like that. They kind of give you a glimpse of a bigger picture. It's probably a whole nother show, but I in 1987 I was bartending on Fisherman's Wharf and training for my black belt test and decided to go on a vision quest. So we went north of San Francisco to Point Reyes National Seashore and hiked out to the ocean and spent the day on the beach visioning and doing whatever. Nothing profound happened. But before we headed back, it was a 5-mile hike back to the car. I decided to go for a swim. Okay, so it's open ocean. I grew up in Southern California, where it's not the open ocean; it's the Santa Barbara Channel. So there's all these islands out there. So it's a very different quality of the continental shelf in Northern California. Just drops off. So the way the waves come in is very different than the way the waves come in Southern California. So I thought nothing of running into the surf. Well, I hit a wave head on. Crushed C3, fractured C2 and C4. So I should have drowned or been paralyzed from the neck down. And it's a long story about what happened, but the first thought I had, I mean, the impact of a wave crushing your cervical spine makes a sound that you don't think you're going to survive. And my very first thought was, so that's how it ends. And then like my consciousness just expanded when, I remember saying very loudly, oh, I get it. Oh, I get, just like boom, 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 until everything made sense. And and I don't remember any of it. I remember the feeling of it, but it's beyond the capacity of the human mind to have those cognitions come back in the mind, but I'll never forget the feeling of it. And then I was rescued. It's a long story. There are many beats to the story, but I was rescued. I was pulled out onto the sand, completely paralyzed. And my friend who was with me, this is one of the things I really love about miracles. I always say, I like Littlewood's law of miracles, that something, what does it say? It's based on the law of very large numbers, and says every person can expect an outrageous event every 30 days. Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
And we start looking for them and noticing them, they happen faster. So anyway, she stood over me and she started to scream, crawl, Gigi, crawl, like at the top of her lungs. And somehow I was in this like very primal state. And I heard her, or my spinal, I knew what to do. And there is another, interestingly enough, there's another body of work called the Continuum. That's a body work movement practice, Emily Conrad Dowd's Continuum work. And she worked with paralyzed people and she had them work through it by creeping and crawling. It's like going through the stages of evolution. There's a phrase, ontology recapitulates philology or something, meaning we go from the womb, from single cell, we go through all the stages of evolution. We go through fish, we go through having a tail, we go through so like I went through all that in my mind's eye. I mean, I was in a very altered state. And then and this links back to the continuum concept and finding Jean, because once I was crawling and I got from the wet sand onto the dry, warm sand, I kind of like came back into ordinary consciousness, and I laid down in the sand, curled up in a fetal position. And I felt like a newborn babe that had just come out of the womb. And the thought occurred to me, this is my natural state. Like, this is who I truly am. And then the very next thought was, why haven't I ever felt this way before? Like, if this is what I am, like, why don't I know that? And why does it take some extreme condition, some extreme event like this? But that's what happens in a lot of near-death experiences. The near-death literature is fascinating.
I know. I've read a lot. I mean, I wouldn't say a lot of it, but I've read some of it.
Yeah,
it's just like,
it's really fascinating. One of the ones I didn't listen to the whole book, but I did see on YouTube a video. This guy wrote a book called Proof of Heaven.
Yeah,
his experience, like he was dead for quite a while, and he's a neurologist or something.
He's a neurologist, so he knew kind of what was happening. Yeah, that was an amazing book.
That was really, really, I mean, if anybody reads that and still thinks I don't believe in any of that stuff, it's like, well, you're just not using your brain, because he was brain dead. Mm-hmm. So one of the things they say is that near-death experience is just the activity of your neocortex when what is it? The chemical that's released, it's actually DMT, it's a chemical that is hallucinogenic, but he was brain dead. So there was nothing happening. So it couldn't have been brain activity that caused this experience that he had. Anyway, yeah. So So it was that question, why haven't I ever felt this way again, that kind of became my driving. That was before I went to graduate school.
Okay.
So, I carried that question into graduate school, and then I carried it everywhere I went. And when I read the continuum concept, I was like, oh, that explains it. This is why I don't know who I am. This is why all the people I know walking around don't really know who they are at a core level. You can kind of feel it in people.
It's fascinating how all of your experiences kind of tie together, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, I think that's the way life is. There's this wandering path, and the onward part. It's like, yep, there's nothing else to do. I mean, you can roll over and die, I guess, if you want.
Yeah.
Certainly, the last year and a half, the last 2 years, coming up on 2 years now, has really.
It's been tough.
Let's not go there, but it's really. I mean, the onward thing. It's just been.
Yeah.
It's been horrible. I mean, I had a lovely. I mean, my COVID was a huge blessing because I was in one place. I actually lived with my 90-year-old mother. Profound healing in our relationship. This book would not have been published had it not been COVID. Because
it just came out. Yeah.
I just had the time to do it. It was like, okay, no social life, no running around, no gym. I'm going to sit down and write this book. And my mother, who knew Jean and didn't much like her. And she not only didn't like Jean, she didn't like the continuum concept because I was a bit of a vigilante, And she read it when I got the first copies. She was gobsmacked. She was just like, oh my God, I had no idea. Jean was this dowdy old lady who wrote this book that her daughter was fanatic about. She had no idea Jean was like this Upper West Side socialite and went to Europe and did all these different things. So it was such a joy for me to have her say that. Like she was like, I can't put it down. I didn't want it.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth says, I'm so glad it's captioned since I'm nearly deaf. Truly wonderful podcast. That's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of the live streams are captioned. She can't hear me, so Elizabeth, but I'm glad. Yeah, awesome book about the heaven one. DMT is theorized to be released from your pineal gland during birth and death. Very interesting stuff.
Yeah, I've heard that too, Alex. Yeah.
So what is that experience that you had? How does that make you feel about our time on Earth and also death?
I don't fear death. I don't want to suffer. For me, I'm not afraid of the actual dying. I have actually considered doing some work with the death and dying. It's kind of in my, got to do that before I die, because I think that our society has such a fear of death. And I think it can be a beautiful, beautiful experience in transition. My father died when I was 29. And it was, I brought something to it that my brothers weren't able to. And my mom was in a lot of pain and fear. And I'll never forget the night he died. I just had this, I looked at him. He'd been in a coma for days. And he had gastrointestinal cancer. And I looked at him, I said, Daddy, I could tell it was near the end and everybody was hanging on. And it was like, are we going to try one more treatment? Or, a couple, he died in February. And for Christmas that year, my brother gave him a tennis racket and tennis shorts. Daddy, I know you're going to pull through. I'm giving him crystals.
That's a lot of pressure to put on somebody.
It's like a lot of denial around death. Like we don't want to let go. And, so I kind of lost my train of thought there.
But just your thought, you want to work with dying people and your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm not afraid of death. I think it's a natural part of life, and there can be tremendous beauty, in that transition. And that's what a lot of the people attracted to the near-death work. There is an organization. They're all over the country. It'll come to me, the name of it. But they have speakers. Well, they used to have monthly speakers talking about their near-death experiences. They probably do on Zoom these days. But those are most of the audiences of the people that are attracted to that work are the people that have a tremendous fear of death.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's also some really powerful work going on now for people that get very depressed when they're sick, where they're doing psilocybin journeys. And there is something about that really allows people who are in a lot of physical pain, dying for cancer or whatever, and then that pain is compounded by the fear of death. And they often do these journeys, guided journeys, that then reveal to them a whole different, reality, and their passing is much more relaxed and easy on them and on the family members, people that love them.
I wish I had known about some of that when my kid's father passed away 2 years ago on December 11th, and we were all there. It's the first time I'd been with somebody who passed away, and we weren't married at the time, but it's just really hard. But at some point, you can just tell they're ready to go when they can't eat, they can't drink. It's just like I told them, Bruce, we've got this. We're going to be okay, and it's okay to go. And,
I actually didn't finish the story about my father. So this day at the hospital, I looked at him and I said, Daddy, do you want us to pray with you? He snapped out of his coma. He looked at me and he said, yes.
Wow.
I gathered everybody around the bed, Catholic family. And I just, we prayed. I had everybody say whatever they would say, their goodbyes. And he died about 2:00 the next morning.
Wow.
So sometimes they just need permission, and I think that's what a lot of what the good hospice work is about. And the death and dying work is like just being present with it.
Yeah. Because Bruce's fiance, she was like, I don't know how I'm going to live without you. And it's just like, that's too much pressure to put on somebody.
Yeah.
The only thing I did when he was passing away is I told him, this is when he was, he couldn't talk or anything, but I just said that I was going to take his motorcycle and drive it cross country. And I knew he was thinking, no, because he wouldn't have trusted me riding his motorcycle. So I got one.
Did you do that? Are you going to do
that? No, I would never do it, but I didn't do it. But I could see, he couldn't talk and he was, breathing heavy, but I could just, this is like a few hours before. And he's just like, it was fun. I could tell.
Oh boy.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
So that's pretty fresh, just 2 years ago. Wow.
Yes, I know. And yesterday was or Saturday, I think, was the 2-year anniversary. And it was, both my kids were having a hard time, and I reminded them of it because I think that weighs in your subconscious. It wasn't like they were just having maybe an issue at work, or my son with an issue with some exams, and I'm just like, this is part of the reason why. It's okay.
Yeah, the seasonal changes remind us always of things that happened in previous. I go through a little bit of a depression every February, and my dad's been dead, I don't know what, 35, 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Time. So
yeah. So I think you talk too about the joy that is our natural state.
Oh, okay. Well, now this is where I get to read something from the book. This is my favorite passage to read.
Because what is the joy in our natural state? That we're not aware of.
Let's see. I have to find it in the manuscript. So this is I'm going to read an excerpt from Jungle Jean, and this is something that happened on her very first expedition. So just to give you a little, framing for this, she was an Upper West Side socialite. She went to Europe, do the European tour, and she met this Italian count, Enrico Middleton, who was a diamond hunter, and he was going back to the Venezuelan. He was going back to the jungle. Back then, they didn't call it the rainforest. Nobody ever heard of a rainforest. It was the jungle.
Mm-hmm.
So she talked him into taking her with him, and so it was her and Enrico, and the man who financed the exposition. His name was Beppe Orlando, and their guides. So the indigenous people that were guiding them up the Amazon to where they were going to go live with this tribe that had never seen white people before. So let's see.
That's awesome. So they were going to look for diamonds, right?
They were going on a diamond hunting expedition. She was not an anthropologist, didn't have a whole lot of regard for academic pursuits. She dropped out of college, And she really believed that the reason she could see what she saw was because she didn't have the lenses that an academic would have if they were going to study. So she
Okay.
just, and she went back 4 times after that first expedition because she was so in love with these people and the way they
Yeah.
lived. She wanted to understand. She sensed very early on that there's something here. This is something I'm looking for. They know something that we don't. And so that's why she was so intent and went back again and again. So this is chapter 1, halfway through the chapter. So one day, without warning, the river halved in volume. They were surrounded by a dense growth of asparagus, ficus, and philodendron. Enrico recognized this passage. He had traversed it before, and he began to describe the challenge that lay ahead in detail. We'll have to climb over the steep granite wall next to Arapuchi Falls, he said. How steep? Jean asked. Quite, Enrico replied, avoiding her eyes. This is the passage you told me about? Beppe frowned nervously. Yes, Enrico replied. Then, with a single slow nod of his head, this is the one. Still avoiding Jean's gaze, he went on. They placed logs across the path of the canoe and haul it inch by inch. The sun is merciless. You could easily get heat stroke. He described the pain he'd experienced time and again when the canoe would slip into a crevice between boulders and pivot out of control, scraping his shins and ankles against the granite. Jean's face remained stoic. Beppe looked horrified. Fearing what lay ahead, the 3 of them spent several days bracing themselves for the hard work and pain that was sure to follow. They arrived at the waterfall full of dread and primed to suffer, already hating every moment of the portage. They started off, grim-faced, dragging the canoe up the rocky slope. When the canoe swung sideways, the sheer weight of it would pin a member of the work party to a burning rock, while the others scrambled to move it off. A quarter of the way up, all ankles were bleeding. By way of begging off for a bit, Jean jumped ahead to photograph the scene. She climbed up 10 yards and perched high on a rock. From that vantage point, at a distance from the action, she noticed a curious fact. There, before her, was a group of men engaged in a single shared task. 2 of them were tense, frowning, losing their tempers at everything and everyone, cursing in the distinctive way of Tuscan men. The Tarapin guides, on the other hand, were having a fine time of it. They were laughing at the unwieldy canoe and making a game of the battle with gravity and rock. Between pushes, they showed off their scrapes and bruises. When, once again, the canoe would wobble forward, pin one, then another of them underneath it, they responded with amusement rather than upset. The fellow who was held bare-backed against the scorching granite invariably laughed the loudest, once he could breathe again. All the men were doing the same work. All were experiencing strain and pain. All were sweating in the blazing hot sun. There was no difference in their situations except one. Jean and the Italians had been conditioned by their culture to believe that such a combination of circumstances was at the very bottom of the scale of well-being. What's more, they were quite unaware they had a choice, any other option as to how they could experience that situation. The guides were equally unaware of their choice. These supposedly primitive people had also been conditioned to deal with their circumstances in a particular way. They knew what lay ahead, but hadn't spent the days before the trek wallowing in dread. Quite the contrary. They approached the portage in a perfectly merry mood. They seemed to revel in the camaraderie. Each forward move of the canoe was viewed as a victory, a cause for celebration. What I just love about that story is how it illustrates it. You know, stories are our best teaching tool. And it's like, even to this day, I can't like get in all my pain drama, you know, like, oh, it's going to be so hard without kind of laughing at myself. Like, okay, yeah, because it doesn't help anything, you know?
No, it doesn't.
In
Oh
fact,
my gosh. And I was going to ask, because, the question was, about how joy, right, is our natural state. And then you have in here, in your little bio, about provocative insight into our current dilemma. And I was like, what is the dilemma? Well, there's the dilemma right there.
Yeah, well, there's the dilemma. And just even, I mean, don't get me started on COVID and the whole polarization, but we take positions, and then we kind of pre-pave our experience because we're already angry before we go in. There's so many families going through all this stuff about the holidays and who can come and who can't and who's vaxxed and who's not vaxxed. And there's just a lot of upset around it all, rather than, my approach is everybody has to make their own decision. I respect everybody's trying to stay safe. That's what we know. Everybody's doing what they think is the right thing to stay safe. So honor that. And I just think we create so many waves just from our unwillingness to accept what's so and grant people their sovereign choices. So that's, I'm not joyous, joyful, happy, and free all the time, but a good bit of the time I'm a lot lighter than I used to be.
Yeah.
Menopause, I don't know. Sometimes I think that it's more about, not having so many hormones flowing through my veins all the time, but I do.
Is that the feeling that you had when the near-death experience, when you saw like everything all at once? Was it joy? Because I've heard, what people feel is like a feeling that you can't even describe.
I couldn't for months. I was in a state of no mind for months. I was in a halo traction device. See my scars. I had this thing bolted to my head with a vest and, frozen. It like immobilizes your neck. So, your whole body's one piece. And I was in that thing and nothing bothered me.
So why did things start bothering you again?
The day the halo came off, all of a sudden my mind came back. It was a horrifying moment. I'm not kidding. I'll never forget the day I woke up and I went, oh no, I'm back. I'd been caged in this thing. I was in this metal cage. And when the cage came off, my mind came back in. Don't ask me why. I think it's just, it's illustrative. And then again, this is another way that everything kind of fits together in my life, because then I became like obsessed with how do I get back there? What do I have to do to experience that joyful state as like my baseline? And I think that that's like, for me, that's the best I can do, is find a baseline of joy. That doesn't mean I'm joyous every single, constantly. Right. It just means that that's my baseline and I can get back there. And I feel like that's the work that I want to do with clients, is help them find that baseline. And it does take some discipline. It takes a lot of mindfulness and paying attention and taking care of oneself. I spend a ridiculous amount of time taking care of myself, but there's nobody else to do it. So what the heck?
Well, as we wrap this up, I'm going to read a few more comments. Elizabeth says, I believe terminal lucidity is a blessing. Although
I love that.
One will live.
Great, Elizabeth.
Kenneth says Alex has an awareness persona about him. And Alex says, let's see, definitely stress is a perception, because anything can be a stressor if we allow it to be. Yeah. And let's see. And then Kenneth, thanks, Kenny. You're an amazing friend. That's what I love about this. Everyone's, kind of interacting with each other. Mariah says, Kenneth and Alex, great insights. So everyone's just like, so many good friends are made through just watching these shows and submitting comments and stuff like that. And great to see you here. Alex says to Mariah, oh, here's DJ. Thanks, DJ, for joining us. And she says, here to support the amazing Emily. Oh, thank you. I wasn't able to support your show tonight. This is, how it is before you go on vacation, right? I've got, just some things I want to wrap up before I fly out to Denver tomorrow to see my daughter. I'm so excited to see her. So sweet. Thank you, Geralyn, for being on this show. It was an awesome interview. I loved it.
Yeah, really a pleasure. I've never done this interactive thing before. I get goosebumps when I see people's comments and stuff. It's really fun.
Yeah, it is cool. So many people watching. We're running out of time to call out everybody's name again, but thank you all for joining us, and I really appreciate it. And Geralyn, I'm going to just put you in the green room for just another minute while I play my outro, and then we're
okay. Great.
Okay.
All right.
So thank you all for watching. I really appreciate you guys. Don't forget me. I'm taking a little break for the holidays. It's something that sometimes I have a challenge with, putting my work down and I don't really call it work, but my coaching and my podcasting and just kind of forgetting about it and spending time. I've told you all that I have a saboteur in my brain that's like a hyperachiever. It says you got to keep achieving. But I know when I take a break, I come back even better and I have some great ideas. And so I hope that you all take a break too over the holiday season and spend some time with yourself and spend some time with family and put the phone down and the social media down and just be present. That's the best present ever. All right. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next year when I go live again. The Onward Podcast is sponsored by Emily Harmon Coaching and Consulting. Visit my website, emilyharmon.com, to learn more about my coaching programs and how you can work with me. Let's move onward together.